Benjin, went to the railroad station, and there was another selection. And my sister, who was at the time 18 years old, wanted to go to a labor camp. They were still doing selections at the railway station, and she did not want to go. And she did not want to go because she didn't want to leave her mother. And my father and my mother agreed that she should stay with my mother. My sister had a disability. She was threatened the detachment of the retina. And if she lifted something heavy, or if she exerted herself, she would be blinded. So therefore, she was almost a disabled person, but we were very lucky to be able together as a family almost to the very end. And a lot of people asked me, how come, including my daughter, who came from Israel, and she asked, Dad, how come that you could stay together in Sosnowiec, where Maniek Morin used to take transport after transport of children and women and deport them? How did you manage to stay as a family? And I will tell you that in a few minutes. But at any rate, we stayed as a family. We got on the train as a family. And on the train, we were huddled together. And my father distributed the last 20 marks that he had, and he gave 5 marks to each of us. And my mother said that if whoever survives, these were her exact words, they imprinted in my brain, whoever survives will meet my grandmother's neighbor, a Christian woman who was very kind to my grandmother. They lived together for over 25 years, and a trusted person. She says, whoever survives will go to her mother's neighbor and leave word before we do anything. This was the last parting word before the gates of the rail car opened. Now I'm going to tell you something which I've never told anybody else, and I decided to tell it because I'm about to write my memoirs, and in the memoirs I feel I have to be as honest as possible and not shield any truth or not hide any secret. And the secret is a terrible secret which some people consider terrible, but which saved my life and my father's life. It was in 1942, beginning of 42, about April 42, just before the major deportation from Sosnowiec ghetto, when 10,000 people were deported. Maniek Morin, who knew my father because my father volunteered to go to Germany to work in a labor camp, and he went and he took 400 men with him. Maniek Morin was a manipulator. He was manipulated together with the Nazis, but he was of the opinion that as long as he collaborates with the Nazis, he will save more Jews than if he does not. That if the deportations are totally handled by the Nazis, there will be more brutality and more death right there and there. So he created a force, a police force, or a militia, in order to help the Jews to transfer from the town that they were, or to lead them to help load them on the trains, as we saw as a very good example of that in The Pianist. Now, in 1942, Maniek Morin came to my father and he said, Jacob, I have a proposition for you. This is the proposition. Either you join the militia and thereby save your family, or you will be sent to the labor camp and the whole family will be deported. And the reason why he said that, because the second time my father went to the labor camp, to the second labor camp, I'm talking a little bit out of order in order to explain to you the circumstances under which this was made. He volunteered again to go to the second time. The first time they only took 400 men. He came back, and the conditions in the camp were livable. They were not behind barbed wires, and they had access to the town. They were actually sending parcels back from the labor camp. And you'll see that documented on many books from labor camps, for people who were in labor camps, who took with them everything that they had from home, and they even, some cases, they had the possessions all the way to the end of the war. So some of the labor camps were not difficult. They only became difficult later. So he came back, and now Monique Marin says, okay, Jakob, I want you to take 2,000 men to a labor camp. So he volunteered again, and they went. And they went to the labor camp, but this time the labor camp was behind barbed wire. The camp was operated by the SA, not the SS. These are the brown shirts, which were really sappers, and road builders. And he was there for about 6 months. And the living conditions at this time were completely different. People were being beaten if they didn't work fast enough. The food was close to starvation diet. They could receive parcels from the ghetto, but there was nothing to send to them. So the conditions were very bad. So my father decided that he had enough of that. So he made himself, went to the infirmary and said he is sick, that he has some stomach disorder, and he wanted to be examined by a doctor. So they shipped all of the sick from that camp. It's called, the camp, by the way, is called Großstrelet, which is not far from Breslau. And all the sick people that wanted to see a doctor were sent back to our ghetto. When they arrived in the ghetto, the doctor examined my father, and of course he found that there's nothing wrong with him. And he told him that he has to go back. So the militia, the Monique Morin's police force, arrested my father and took him to the police station. From the police station, he jumped out of the second store window. He bruised his ankles, but he landed properly on the pavement, and he escaped. He was hiding out for about 3 months. And it was at this point, after 3 months, Monique Marin finally said, through an intermediary, tell Jakob Leipciger that we know where he is and that I want to speak to him. So my father decided to risk, and he went to speak to Monique Morin. And Monique Morin made this following proposition to him, as I told you. Either you become a member of the militia, the Jewish police, or you're going to be, your whole family is going to be sent on a deportation. As it happened, 2 months, my father, after talking to my mother and considering my sister's condition and the fact that I was just a young boy, decided to err on the side of saving his family. It was a difficult job, as you can imagine. He never spoke about it. He never spoke to me about it. I heard him talk to my mother about the conditions and what was happening. He was saying that he was a big man, and he was a very kind-hearted man. And he felt that he never committed any offense that a policeman could commit. He never hit anybody. He was not where he was. Did not carry with him one of those batons or sticks. And the reason why I didn't say it up to this point, I didn't divulge it, so I did divulge it on the tape which I made for Spielberg, because I felt that the record should be straight and it should be recorded there. And I told on the tape the same story. So my children, if they took the time to read, to listen to the 6 hours of tape, they would find this out. But I decided to do it today for two reasons. One is because I have my daughter who, when she came from Israel, told me about the fact that the professor said he must have been a policeman, and when she confronted me with that, I said, yes, he was. But I didn't talk about it because I wanted to protect the honor of my father. Because there's a lot of people in our community that would judge him as being a collaborator with the Nazis. But the question that whether he was or he was not is up to each individual. To each individual, from my point of view, he saved my life. He kept our family together till the very end. We had an almost normal life within the ghetto as much as it can be. And when we came to the camp, we were still a family. So when we got off the train on the ramp, which I pointed out to you, to some of you, between here and Birkenau, and we didn't really have time to say goodbye to each other. We were torn apart, and my father and I lined up in the first row for segregation. And I told you before, and I'm going to say it again, that what happened is that I was sent to Mengele's left. And my father, Mengele asked him to approach. By that time, he did not have the militia hat or his armband. He wanted to be incognito. But Mengele, nevertheless, called him up and said, here, I will send these men to you. You line them up, and when they're 100, march them off. This was a very unusual occurrence, because normally that job was done by the prisoners that were inmates of the camp and wore the striped uniform. To this day, I have regret that I did not say goodbye to my mother, that I didn't hug her, that I didn't say I love you, because we were suddenly torn apart when the gates opened and we were ordered all out. The fact that we didn't have any possession didn't really matter, because those who took care and brought things with them, the only thing that it served, the suitcases, is to sit on them because there was not enough room to sit on the floor. So when we arrived here and we were separated, and I was standing in the lineup looking to where the situation is, and from where we were on that ramp, we couldn't see anybody, any buildings, and we didn't know where we were. When I looked around, I saw my mother and my sister together. Could you open? I saw my mother and my sister standing in the lineup with the healthy women, and my father, of course, with the young people, and I was with young boys, older men, my older uncle, and we were standing in the lineup, waiting to see what happened. At that point, I think I remember telling you that my father called my name, and he said to the assessment that he was with, this is my son, he's 17 years old. After he took me out of that lineup, you know the detail of that conversation, and after we got to the lineup, and after we got into the camp, I asked him, how come that you could come and ask for me? He says, well, I was lining up these people, and this Nazi soldier came over to me, and he says, oh, I know you from somewhere. And my father figured that he didn't tell me where he knew him, but I suspect that he knew him from the selection that he must have been participating in during the time that we were in the ghetto. Now, I had for many years terrible difficulties with that. I felt guilty that I survived at the cost of possibly somebody else. And I feel that after all of these years, I had to make peace with myself and make peace with my father and not judge him, because that's what I was doing. I was judging him. And finally, when we were in camp, and I told you how we had a lineup and the selection, and how I was selected. Again, I was not allowed to go selection. They rejected me. My father was accepted, and my father then got dressed, and went to speak to the Nazi officer who then allowed me to join the 600-man transport, and I was 601 in a 650-man transport, on the idea that if anyone gets sick or dies, I would be the first one to take his place. Again, a terrible situation. Can you imagine sitting there and looking around 600 men and say, who is going to give me his place? Almost silently wishing that somebody would get sick or somebody would reject it or that somebody would do something wrong in order to save my life. We clung to our life as the only possession that we had. And it's difficult for us to judge what it feels like when you're fighting for your life until you are in that position yourself. So I hope that you are not judging my father nor me for accepting my life from him. After we were in camp, my father decided that he heard that when the people who went volunteer to go to work were in contact with women. I think I told you this story, but I'm going to remind you again that when he went to see whether he could get in touch with my mother, to tell her, to assure her that I am alive. Because as far as she was concerned, I went straight to the gas chamber. And then one of the most important things, as Viktor Frankl wrote in his little book, In Search of Meaning, said that that's what it was. If you had a meaning to your life in camp, it was easier to survive. If you had no hope to survive, to meet with anybody else, that you were only by yourself, the chances of survival were much less. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist before he entered the camp. So my father went, and when he came back, he didn't return, and I stood outside that gate, or another gate, a few barracks further down, and I watched. It was dark already, and I watched behind me as the flames from the crematorium were shooting up skyward, and I was thinking that my father's soul must be rising together with the ashes and flames to the heaven. I was despondent, and I didn't know what I would do, because as long as I was with my father, I had a chance of survival. By myself, my chances were very much slimmer. Finally, he arrived, and he came, and he brought with him clothes, because before that, they didn't expect men, they didn't expect boys, so I was wearing men's clothes. Is that better? I was wearing men's clothes, and I looked like a scarecrow. And actually, I tell it to the students that if I pulled my pants up to my crotch, my waist was up over to my chest, and when I put them on my waist, my crotch was at my knees, which according to today's style, I would have been right in style. I do that purposely because it's true, and because I want to break the tension. Because what I'm going to tell you next is very difficult. Anyways, the clothes that my father brought to me were a pair of riding boots and a pair of riding breeches and a jacket that fit me. Being a tailor, he knew exactly what size he needed for me. But when I put that thing on, those clothes on, I looked more like a human being than a scarecrow. And but before we left, we were here over Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur, the Nazis decided to show us and the world that they are stronger than our God. So they rounded up 10,000 of inmates. They stripped them of their clothes, They put them on the trucks, and they drove them past those barbed wires that you saw when you came in, to gas chamber number 4 or 5, which is to my left in the corner, which we will see. We will see today gas chamber 2 and 3, maybe 4 and 5 we'll see tomorrow, and I'll tell you a story about that. But the problem with what happened is that being a young kid and curious, they confined us to the barracks. We were not allowed to go out, which some of the Jews, some of the people, took as a wonderful blessing, because what it did is allowed them to quietly stand between the bunks and say the Yom Kippur service. There were many people who knew the service by heart, and when they didn't, they knew how to fill in. But I was not interested in that. Hearing the noise outside, I wanted to see what was happening. So I went to the top of the bunk, and you see the slit between the roof and the wall. That allowed me to look outside and see, which a sight that I wish I've never seen, because the trucks were carrying naked women screaming at the top of the head, because they knew what's going to happen. Once we were here in Birkenau, there were no more secrets. The Nazis could not hide from us anymore, and the prisoners who were here used the fact that they could say to us, if you don't behave, you will join your family in the gas chamber. And so everybody knew what was happening. And when these women were transported, they knew exactly where they're going. And they were screaming at the head of, as hard as they could. I didn't know at the time, but when I went back to Poland in 1945, I found out that my mother and my sister were impossibly among those women. So that's how I know that I can say Yotzai for my mother and my sister on Yom Kippur. And unfortunately, we were still in camp, and a few days later, we were transported out of the camp here to another camp called Grossrosen. And I thank you for being strong, for helping me to tell you the story, which I have never told to anybody else. You're the first group to hear it, and as I said, I hope that you do not judge neither me nor my father, for no one can tell what we would do in the same situation. Whether you would, like I'm looking at Anita, her father did a heroic thing. He sent her away from the ghetto to a strange man to save her. He himself perished, and she survived. Had he kept her with him, she would have survived. She would not have survived. A very difficult position, a very difficult decision that man had to do. But yet, he had to do it. There's Bill Wiener here, whose father, Danny, wrote a story about when he was in the partisan, that he witnessed that when Nazis found a child, an 11-year-old boy, and his father, and they told to the father, they said to the father, you have to hang your son. And the father said, I'm not going to do that. So the Nazi said, then your son will hang you. And the father convinced his son, the father put the noose around his neck, and he kicked the chair from underneath him, thus hanging himself. And only today I found from Bill Wiener that they met in 1985 at the convention in Washington, D.C., the Holocaust Survivors Convention, and he met that man who was felt very guilty, and he felt that he couldn't live very long with him. And subsequently, he took his life because he could not live with the decision that he took. And his father begged him, please, save your life. I have lived my life. You have not. So these are the situations and the conditions under which we had to live and deal with. And no one is entitled to judge us for what happened. And I hope and thank you for listening and being with me. And I think I'm going to ask us to continue with the program. Okay?
Thank you, Nate.